The highly anticipated 2023 zombie thriller The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon Season 1 has finally hit the screens. As a man who will never disappoint you, Daryl Dixon is truly deserving of being the undisputed king of popularity in The Walking Dead. In comparison to the recently concluded Dead City Season 1, fans are even more excited about the premiere of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon Season 1. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Daryl's zombie adventure in France has officially begun. At 9:30 in the morning, somewhere in the vast Atlantic, Daryl and his small boat had been drifting for countless days and nights. At that moment, a wave hit the unconscious Daryl and he dove into the water. Thankfully, Daryl came to his senses. However, days of scorching sun and hunger had left this man utterly exhausted. With all his strength, he attempted to crawl onto the beach, but a small wave easily knocked him back. Fortunately, land wasn't too far away and Daryl managed to escape the ocean. Surveying the unfamiliar surroundings, he showed no signs of fear. Instead, he immediately fixed his gaze on a water bucket ahead. Without thinking too much, Daryl picked up the bucket and drank the water mixed with fine sand. Since his small boat had already been swept away by the waves, Daryl had no choice but to move forward. The seaside facilities were in ruins, and everywhere one looked, there was a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Yet, this couldn't deter Daryl from his path, as he had already been battle-hardened in this apocalyptic world. Daryl arrived at a coastal town that had lost all signs of human life. The corpses on the roadside were evidence of the town's catastrophic fate. He ventured into an abandoned ship in search of useful supplies. Before long, a nearby radio cassette player caught Daryl's attention. He quickly found some batteries and inserted them, hoping to find some clues. The cassette player began playing the voice of a man. Daryl picked up a photograph from the map. It turned out the man in the recording was the former owner of this ship. The recording detailed the man's experiences before his demise. He had come here to seek refuge, only to find that the place had fallen. Daryl finally learned that he was in the oldest city in France, Marseille. His situation was dire, and he couldn't remember how he ended up here from the United States. But the journey had to continue. Daryl needed to figure out why he was here and find his way back home. After a night of rest, Daryl decided to leave this place. Following the ship's owner's lead, he decided to head to Biarritz in the south of France, where there might be a harbor with transport to the United States. With his destination set, Daryl quickly gathered supplies. Due to the perilous journey ahead, he was prepared for the worst.
My name's Daryl Dixon. I come from a place called the Commonwealth. It's in America. I went out looking for something, and all I found was trouble. If I don't make it back, I want them to know I tried. Hell, I'm still trying.
So Daryl set out on the road alone, and he traveled day and night. Fortunately, he encountered no significant dangers on the way, and he eventually arrived near a small town. Ahead lay a factory, and Daryl pushed open the door, hoping to find some food. However, the sound of the door opening attracted nearby zombies. The zombies push over the vase in front of them and the sound attracts other zombies. And so, the entire factory of zombies began closing in on Daryl. Daryl faced danger without fear as he quickly dispatched the approaching zombies. However, what he didn't anticipate was the corrosive substance that clung to the zombies. Seizing an opportunity while Daryl was distracted, one of the zombies firmly gripped his arm, and a high concentration of sulfuric acid began eating away at his skin. He felt intense pain, but without hesitation, Daryl fought to break free from the zombies' grasp. Before long, he managed to clear out the zombies within the factory. Daryl successfully escaped from the factory, but the wound on his arm had worsened significantly. Lacking medical supplies, he could only temporarily clean the wound with water. The entire process was observed by a woman not far away. Daryl noticed her, but they didn't exchange any words. Adhering to the survival rule of avoiding unnecessary complications in the post-apocalyptic world, Daryl turned and walked away. Shortly after, he arrived at a farmhouse. Daryl cautiously entered, avoiding the makeshift alarm system on the floor. A noise from the side drew his attention. A woman was drawing water from a well. Not wanting to startle her, Daryl began to retreat. However, in doing so, he accidentally triggered a nearby device, causing a noise that caught the woman's attention. Daryl quickly raised his hands to signal his goodwill. At that moment, an elderly man stepped out of the house. Since they were communicating in French, Daryl couldn't understand their conversation. Fortunately, The woman could speak English. After a brief conversation, they began to lower their guard. Daryl expressed his desire to trade for some food, and the woman gladly agreed. He could take the fruit from the crate to satisfy his hunger. Daryl wasted no time and helped himself, taking a few apples and putting them in his bag. The woman, seeing the American in front of her, continued to express her kindness and introduced herself as Maribel. The elderly man also greeted Daryl warmly, expressing his wish to go to America together. Daryl, ever cautious, did not immediately respond. He simply stated that in the post-apocalyptic world, there was no longer a distinction between countries. Just then, a car pulled up. The armed man in the vehicle signaled for Daryl to drop his weapon and sit to the side. Sensing the impending danger, Daryl complied. The man and Maribel conversed in French, and Daryl couldn't understand a word. At that moment, the man forcefully grabbed Maribel, attempting to pull her into the car. Seeing the situation turn dire, Daryl swiftly grabbed a knife and, taking advantage of the guard's distraction, dealt a fatal blow to him. When Michel saw his men killed, he grabbed his gun and fired. Daryl fell to the ground in an instant. In this critical moment, Maribel struck him down with a heavy blow from behind. Maribel then took her weapon and stuck it in Michel's chest. Crisis solved. Daryl was badly hurt and wanted Maribel to hand him a medical kit. To his surprise, behind him they suddenly removed their disguises. Guillaume removed his eye patch and approached Daryl, striking him on the head with a club, rendering him unconscious. They then began searching through his backpack. Daryl, in a daze, vaguely noticed the woman who had been following him before had now appeared here. Subsequently, he fell into unconsciousness. While in a state of slumber, Daryl recalled the scenes of his departure, memories of Judith and Carol, and his promise to find Rick and Michonne and bring them back home. Before long, Daryl began regaining consciousness. At that moment, two nuns hurriedly entered the room and gagged him with a cloth. Then another nun, speaking a language Daryl didn't understand, took out a fire stick and burned Daryl's arm with stick after stick. The screams echoed throughout the church. The next morning Daryl woke up from his sleep, which had been quite restful. Before long, a nun entered the room and greeted Daryl, introducing herself as Isabel. Seeing that Daryl remained silent, Isabel proceeded to examine the wound on Daryl's arm. Isabel explained to Daryl that cauterization was the best way to prevent the spread of infection, and their intention the previous night had been to help Daryl save his arm. In an effort to avoid infection, Isabel had even prepared hot water. Following this, Isabel took Daryl on a tour of the ancient monastery. Inside, most of the inhabitants were nuns and orphans who lived harmoniously, farming and scavenging to sustain themselves. They got along well with each other. Medieval churches generally had armories, and the nuns learned how to use weapons just in case. In the post-apocalyptic world, they had to learn how to protect themselves. The farming techniques in the church were quite advanced, and they were self-sufficient in terms of food. The nuns warmly greeted Daryl, and soon, a young boy approached him, displaying great affection for Daryl. The two of them engaged in lengthy conversations, and as Laurent observed Daryl's heavy-hearted demeanor, he continued to offer words of encouragement and support. Maribel and her grandfather are on their way when a car approaches, led by a man with a fierce look on his face. It turns out that the men Daryl killed were his men, and they're here to find out what happened to them. After some probing, he suspected that Maribel had information about their whereabouts. To force Maribel to speak, the man struck Guillaume down with a club. Maribel was frightened by the scene before her and had no choice but to lead them back to the farmhouse. Seeing the bodies of his henchmen, the man was furious. In a bid to protect herself, Maribel falsely claimed that Daryl had robbed them. The man became somewhat uneasy because one of the henchmen was his brother. Just then, a noise from the side caught everyone's attention. Michel, slowly walking towards them, had now turned into a zombie. Witnessing his own brother in such a state, the man was tormented. However, the situation had become inevitable. The man picked up a knife and personally put an end to his brother's existence. Subsequently, one of his henchmen noticed Daryl's bloodstains and an adjacent piece of paper. The man recognized the notice. Isabel, the nun from the monastery, had always been recruiting survivors through this notice. There had to be a connection. The man immediately decided to head to the monastery. Meanwhile, the people at the monastery were unaware of the impending danger. Laurent was reciting poetry. Daryl hears a noise and walks over. A zombie appears in front of them. Isabel came along and told Laurent to leave and tried to explain it to Daryl. However, Laurent remained calm and told Daryl that this was Père Jean, the leader of the monastery. Daryl, an atheist, didn't believe in the existence of a god in the post-apocalyptic world, and he thought there was something sinister about the monastery, possibly involving witchcraft. But none of that mattered at the moment. Daryl simply wanted to leave. Seeing that they couldn't detain Daryl, Isabel finally revealed the truth. She showed Daryl a piece of paper with a drawing of a man crossing the sea. A man who bore a striking resemblance to Daryl. Daryl couldn't help but think Lauren's drawing skills were rather poor. However, this painting was done 3 weeks before Daryl came here. Isabel told Daryl that they have a union called the Union of Hope. The leader of the alliance was a Buddhist monk who had passed through the monastery during a pilgrimage. When he saw Lauren, he saw something special, an answer to a prophecy. The alliance had a base in northern France, and they wanted to nurture Lauren. 6 months ago, the monk sent word, hoping they would send Lauren to the base. Unfortunately, Père Jean, who was responsible for escorting Lauren, met with an accident. Isabel asked Daryl to escort Lauren. Lauren had special abilities. He could see things that others couldn't. Daryl doesn't believe Isabel's bullshit. He's looking for a weapon to use, and he just wants to get out of here. He's seen the Last of Us storyline before. Isabel is still trying to persuade Daryl because she believes that the base will raise Lauren to be what the prophecy says he is, and the Messiah is Jesus Christ. Daryl doesn't believe that. He just wants to find his way home. The nun believed that everything happened for a reason, and Lille Havre had a port where there were rumored to be frequent ships. The marked route on the map was Père Jean's plan to take Lauren northward. Along this route were some of the Alliance's checkpoints that could assist them. Heading north was dangerous and fraught with challenges, and Daryl's lack of French made reaching the port a daunting task. Lauren was fluent in French, and the final destination on the route was very close to the port. So, the best choice was to take Lauren north. Daryl realized he had been deceived and picked up his weapons. Intending to leave, Daryl had just left the house when he ran into Lauren, who told him,
Nous nous reverrons. It means we shall meet again.
Daryl, when he heard that, he just replied silently to the nuns.
Ain't my problem.
Daryl then left the convent. However, he hadn't gone far when the sound of approaching vehicles caught his attention. He quickly hid behind a nearby tree. A heavily armed group of people was approaching, and judging by their direction, they were likely heading to the monastery. Daryl felt a deep sense of concern. Before long, they arrived at the entrance of the monastery. As soon as they arrived, they made it clear that the purpose of their journey was to find the American. The elderly nun recognized the man before her, Cadron, a notorious local gang leader. Seeing that she couldn't stop him, she reluctantly allowed them to enter. Isabel, realizing the impending danger, hurriedly concealed Lauren. Then, she distributed weapons to the nuns, preparing for an inevitable battle. The well-trained nuns quickly armed themselves, while Isabel decided to confront Cadron alone. Cadron produced the notice, and Isabel vehemently denied it. Naturally, Cadron didn't believe her and immediately ordered his men to search the premises. Before long, they noticed the hidden chamber where Lauren was hiding. Just as he was about to force his way in, the shouts of his men came from outside, and it turned out that they had discovered the presence of Père Jean. Cadron saw the weakness of the nuns and ordered them to hand over Daryl or kill Père Jean. Yet the man and the priest were acquainted, and he was somewhat unable to make a move. The nuns pleaded desperately, but Cadron continued to pressure the man. In the end, the man killed Père Jean. Witnessing Père Jean being stabbed to death, Lauren rushed out. Père Jean had taken great care of him, and even when he turned into a zombie, Lauren still cared deeply for him. Upon seeing the boy, Cadron wanted to recruit him into his group. Daryl intervened just in time, dispatching one of Cadron's men with a swift strike. The battle began in earnest as both sides split up. The three of them look at the armed nuns in front of them in disbelief. Nevertheless, a fierce battle ensued. Meanwhile, Daryl displayed his combat skills. Catching Cadron's men off guard, he quickly dispatched Cadron's accompanying henchmen. However, Daryl was at a disadvantage in his one-on-one fight against Cadron. Cadron was a formidable opponent, and he managed to overpower Daryl, pinning him to the ground. As Cadron was about to deliver a fatal blow, Isabel intervened, delivering a powerful axe strike that injured Cadron's arm. Without his weapon, Cadron ran for his life. Daryl rushed to fire, but missed Cadron's vitals. Daryl rushes out the door, but his gun is empty. Cadron managed to escape, leaving Daryl frustrated. When Daryl returned to the monastery, he was shocked by the devastating scene before him. The nuns, with whom he had spent the last few days, had all perished inside. The sudden appearance of the zombies also awakened the tiger in Daryl. When he entered the house, the old nun is also seriously injured, and on her deathbed she still believes Laurent is the cure for this sick world. At night, in the convent, a few people began to work on the aftermath. Though they mourned the loss of their companions, they knew they had to press on. The main characters were now united, determined to take Laurent northward with them. Meanwhile, in the northern port of Le Havre, the soldiers were discussing the escape of a prisoner. A woman approached them, questioning the crew about the prisoner's escape. The crew nervously explained that an American had caused chaos on the ship, resulting in the loss of many experimental subjects. The doctor hurriedly assured the woman that there were still some subjects available for their experiments. Looking at the approaching zombies and the crew discussing the prisoners who had fallen overboard, the answer to the mystery of Daryl's arrival in France was hidden on this ship.